Hello and welcome. The wind carries whispers through shattered columns that pierce the jungle canopy like broken teeth, and somewhere beneath your feet, vast chambers sleep in darkness, waiting for footsteps that may never come. Xendrik remembers. The continent remembers everything, every empire that rose in glory, every civilization that fell to dust, every curse spoken in the final moments before annihilation. When you set foot upon these shores, when the humid air first fills your lungs, and the alien calls of creatures unknown echo through endless green, you become part of that memory. You become another page in a story written in ruins and blood, in shattered dreams and forbidden knowledge. This is the dark continent, the forbidden shore, the place where maps end and legends begin. Xendrik stretches across the southern reaches of Eberron like a scar upon the world, a landmass nearly as large as Corvair itself. Yet, you will find it marked on few maps with any detail. The cartographers of the 5 nations draw vague coastlines, sketch uncertain mountain ranges, and leave the interior blank, not from ignorance, but from wisdom. What lies within defies documentation. The landscape shifts, rivers change course overnight. Mountains appear where valleys stood the previous morning. Ancient magic saturates every stone, every tree, every breath of air, and it warps reality itself in ways both subtle and catastrophic. The jungle dominates Xendrik with a ferocity unknown elsewhere in Eberron. Trees rise hundreds of feet into the air, their canopies so dense that sunlight becomes a rare and precious thing on the forest floor. Vines as thick as a human torso coil around trunks, creating natural bridges and deadly snares. The vegetation grows with unnatural speed, reclaiming any clearing within days, consuming ruins that have stood for millennia in mere weeks. When the magic waxes strong, you can hear the growth at night, a subtle creaking and rustling that never quite stops, as if the jungle breathes with a life of its own. But the jungle merely covers the truth. Beneath that endless green lie the bones of the greatest civilization Eberron has ever known. Approximately 80,000 years before the present day, when the current age was not even a dream, when Corvair remained an untamed wilderness, and the races of the modern world had not yet emerged from savagery. Xendrik belonged to the giants. Their empire spanned the entire continent, a realm of impossible grandeur and magical achievement that makes the present age seem like a dim shadow by comparison. The giants did not simply build cities. They reshaped the very fabric of reality to suit their needs. They carved mountains into palaces, transformed deserts into gardens, and bound elementals to their will with such skill that the genies themselves paid tribute. The knowledge that enabled such achievements came from an unexpected source, the dragons of Argonessen themselves. In those ancient days, some dragons chose to mentor the giants, foremost among them the descendants of Xen'drik, who shared the secrets of magic with these promising creatures. The giants learned well, perhaps too well, developing magical capabilities that would eventually threaten the entire world. The giants organized their civilization into a strict hierarchy, with each of the 12 giant subtypes fulfilling a specific role in their society. The storm giants ruled from the highest peaks and the grandest palaces, their minds encompassing visions of empire that spanned centuries. They commanded weather itself, calling hurricanes with a gesture, splitting the sky with lightning to illuminate their monuments. The cloud giants served as the empire's scouts and explorers, riding the winds to distant shores, mapping the world from perspectives that no other race could achieve. Fire giants managed the forges and workshops where the empire's wonders took shape. They melted adamantine in crucibles heated by bound fire elementals, shaped mithril with hammer blows that rang like thunder across the land. The weapons they crafted could cleave through solid stone. The armor they forged turned aside dragonfire. Their greatest works remain to this day, buried in vaults deep beneath the jungle, still perfect after tens of millennia. Frost giants controlled the empire's food production through enormous ice vaults that preserved harvests for years, ensuring abundance even when drought or blight struck the agricultural regions. Stone giants carved the monumental architecture that defined giant civilization, temples that dwarfed mountains, roads that ran straight as arrows for hundreds of miles, irrigation systems that made jungles bloom. Hill giants, though considered the lowest caste, provided the physical labor that made it all possible. Their prodigious strength moving stones that 100 humans could not budge. For tens of thousands of years, the giant empire endured and flourished. Dynasties rose and fell. Wars erupted between rival giant factions and were settled through both magic and might. New discoveries pushed the boundaries of the possible ever further. The giants grew confident in their supremacy, certain that their civilization would outlast the continents themselves. They built cities of such grandeur that modern explorers can scarcely believe their eyes when they glimpse what remains: floating towers, walls of force connecting impossible distances, structures that defy every law of physics and engineering. They did not understand that their growing power had caught the attention of something far more dangerous than any mortal threat. Dalquor, the region of dreams, exists outside the normal cosmology of Eberron. It occupies a space adjacent to reality, touching every sleeping mind, reflecting the collective unconsciousness of all dreaming beings. Approximately 40,000 years ago, the quarry alien entities from Dalquor invaded Xendrik through a planar gate, connecting Eberron to their realm. The quarry organized themselves into a strict hierarchy with the Devourer of Dreams, later known as the Dreaming Dark. At its apex, these entities fed upon mortal dreams, but they wanted more than mere sustenance. They sought to control the waking world itself, to reshape reality according to their nightmarish visions. The giants, with their vast population and their powerful dreams infused with magical energy, became the quarry's primary target. The war that followed raged for thousands of years. Giant artificers created devices that could pierce the veil between planes, allowing giant warriors to enter Dal Quor itself and fight the quarry in their own realm. Giant wizards developed spells specifically designed to harm psychic entities, weaving protective wards around their cities that prevented quarry possession. But the quarry adapted faster than the giants anticipated. The dreaming dark proved capable of rapid evolution, altering its tactics, developing new forms of psychic assault. By approximately 39,000 years ago, the giants realized they faced a terrible choice. They could not win the war through conventional means. Desperate, the Sulat League, one of the giant factions, developed what they called the Moonbreaker, a doomsday weapon designed to end the quarry threat permanently. This eldritch machine would sever Dal Quor's connection to Eberron entirely, cutting the region of dreams loose from the material plane. The ritual required channeling energy of unimaginable magnitude, and the giants understood the risks. Based on what we know of the devastation that followed, we can assume they calculated the potential costs, though whether they truly comprehended the full scope of what they were unleashing remains uncertain. The activation of the Moonbreaker succeeded in its primary purpose. It destroyed the Moon Crya and severed the planar gate between Eberron and Dal Quor. The quarry felt their link to the material plane rupture, felt the infinite supply of mortal dreams suddenly cut off. Dal Quor spun away into the cosmological darkness, no longer touching Eberron, no longer able to threaten the waking world directly. The cataclysm that resulted shook Xendrik to its core. The sun's light was blotted out for a decade, as portions of the shattered moon rained down from the sky for years, spreading devastation across the continent and perhaps the entire world. Mountains collapsed, and gaping wounds, the size of entire cities, were rent open in the earth. Large portions of Xendrik were plunged beneath the sea. The giant civilization staggered, but survived this initial catastrophe. This could imply that their structures were resilient enough to withstand even planetary-scale disasters. Or perhaps that enough giants remained to begin rebuilding. Yet the giants' troubles had only begun. Centuries later, as they attempted to recover from the war with Dal Quor, another conflict emerged, this time with their own slaves. The elves who had served the giants for 20,000 years began to rebel, seeking their freedom. The giants, their civilization already weakened, turned once again to the same sort of catastrophic magic that had defeated the quarry, threatening to unleash similarly devastating forces against the elvish uprising. The dragons of Arganessen had watched the destruction of Crya with growing alarm. They had resisted intervening during the Quarry War, but when the giants threatened to use their doomsday weapons again, the dragons acted, shocked and alarmed at the forces already unleashed by the giants. The conclave of Arganesson concluded that the giants had become an existential threat to all of Eberron. The dragons believed that if the Titans could not rule the world, they would destroy it rather than submit. A scaled army poured forth from Arganesson, with flights of all colors led by the militant worms of the light of Cyberes. The conflict was brutal, and its outcome never in doubt. The dragons had no interest in holding territory. They made no effort to avoid civilian casualties. They brought fire, fang, and epic magic to bear in the most destructive ways imaginable. Dragons possess power that grows with age, and the ancient worms of Arganesson wielded magic beyond anything modern spellcasters can comprehend. Magic that could fundamentally alter the laws governing entire regions. In the end, nothing was left of the proud nations of Xendrik. Giant, elf, and all other cultures of the land were laid low by the dragons. The dragons unleashed powerful curses to ensure that the giants would never again threaten the world. They laid the Traveler's Curse, which warps time and space throughout Xendrik, making navigation unreliable and causing the landscape itself to shift unpredictably. They laid the Darashka Tull, a curse that causes any culture growing too large to be gripped by homicidal rage, ensuring that no unified civilization could ever rise again on Xendrik. The dragons called this event Kurash or Relanastrix, Orion's folly, acknowledging that the giants would never have posed such a threat if dragons had not shared the secrets of magic with them. Having completed their mission of annihilation, the dragons returned to Arganesson to brood, and the conclave forbade any flight from sharing the secrets of Arganesson with lesser beings again. The giant survivors found themselves in a world transformed by dragonfire and curse. Their cities lay in ruins. Their population had been decimated. The magical knowledge that had elevated them to near-divine status began slipping away, lost with each archmage who died without passing on their secrets. The curses the dragons laid ensured that recovery would be impossible. Any attempt to rebuild civilization on too large a scale triggered murderous rage among the population, tearing apart any nascent unity. With each passing century, the giants declined further. The curse that permeated Xendrik sank into their bloodlines, affecting each generation more severely than the last. Storm giants found their mental acuity fading, their visionary capacity diminishing. Fire giants forgot the secrets of their forges. Stone giants lost the geometric precision that had allowed them to create architectural marvels. The knowledge had not been entirely destroyed. Fragments remained in ruins, in artifacts, in half-remembered oral traditions. But accessing and understanding, it became increasingly impossible for minds that grew cloudier with each generation. The slaves the giants had kept rose up in the chaos. The elves, who would later transform into the Drow, saw their opportunity and seized it. They claimed portions of the ruins for themselves and descended into the depths beneath the continent, establishing their own civilizations in the underworld. Other races, humans who had served as laborers, various peoples kept as servants or subjects, scattered into the wilderness, establishing their own cultures among the remnants of giant glory. 5,000 years after the devastation, based on the degree of decline described in surviving accounts, the giant empire had completely collapsed. The survivors had degenerated into scattered tribes that barely remembered their former greatness. Storm giants lived alone in isolated peaks, occasionally speaking prophecies they no longer understood. Fire giants wandered the volcanic regions, maintaining forges out of instinct rather than purpose. Stone giants carved meaningless patterns into cliff faces, echoes of architectural knowledge they could no longer consciously access. The hill giants suffered the worst fate. Never particularly intelligent even at the empire's height, they devolved into savage creatures, living in caves, attacking anything that approached, operating on pure instinct. Many became cannibals, developing a taste for the flesh of their own kind, as well as that of smaller races. They kept no records, no traditions, nothing that might hint at their people's past glories. The modern giants of Xendrik live in the shadow of their ancestors' achievements. When you encounter them in the ruins, when a hill giant charges from the jungle with mindless rage, or when a stone giant watches you from a cliff with inscrutable eyes, you witness the final chapter of the greatest tragedy in Eberron's history. These creatures, these broken remnants, once commanded the world. They once reshaped continents, bound the elements themselves, and fought entities from beyond reality. Now they barely survive in the ruins of their own making, unable to even understand the monuments they pass daily, unable to grasp that the rubble they use for shelter once formed palaces that rivaled the domains of gods. The dragon's curses ensure that they can never fully recover, never regain what was lost. The giant civilization died approximately 39,000 years ago, and the modern giants are merely the ghosts walking through its tomb. When you stand before a giant ruin, when you see columns carved with precision that modern stonemasons cannot replicate, when you find artifacts that still function flawlessly after dozens of millennia, remember what created them. Remember that the giants sacrificed everything to defend Eberron from the Quarry invasion, only to be annihilated by the very dragons who had taught them magic in the first place. Remember that every stone, every carving, every magical device represents knowledge that has been permanently lost, capabilities that the current age cannot hope to match. The giants saved the world from Dal Quor by destroying the moon itself, and the dragons responded by destroying them, by laying curses that would echo through 39 millennia, by ensuring that Xendrik would never again host a civilization capable of threatening Arganessen. The jungles grow thick over their graves. The curses the dragons unleashed still warp the land. Their descendants wander as shadows of former glory. But the ruins remain. And in those ruins, written in stone and spell, in artifact and architecture, lies the history of an empire that touched heights modern civilization cannot imagine and fell to depths that still poison the continent. That history calls to you now, drawing you deeper into Xendrik's mysteries, promising knowledge and power to those brave or foolish enough to seek it among the broken monuments of a civilization destroyed by dragon judgment. The giants are gone, but Xendrik remembers, and it waits. Section 2. The Drow of Xendrik and Ancient Peoples. The tunnels beneath Xendrik run deeper than the ocean trenches, descending into darkness that has never known sunlight, never felt wind, never heard the songs of surface birds. Down there, in caverns so vast that their ceilings disappear into blackness overhead, in passages that wind for miles through solid stone, another civilization thrives. The Drow of Xendrik are not like their cousins in other lands. They did not flee underground in shame or exile. They descended as conquerors, as liberators, as slaves who broke their chains and claimed the underworld as their birthright. When the giants ruled Xendrik in the height of their power, they required servants to perform tasks beneath their notice. The elves of Eberron had recently discovered seafaring, their graceful ships venturing beyond their island homeland for the first time in their history. Giant ships intercepted these explorers, and the crew found themselves facing beings who towered over them like living mountains. The giants offered what seemed like a fair exchange: service in return for knowledge, labor in return for access to the Empire's wonders. Whether the elves truly had a choice in this arrangement remains a matter of scholarly debate. But the historical records suggest they entered servitude willingly at first, not understanding the duration of their commitment. The elves accepted. They could not have known what that acceptance would cost them. For tens of thousands of years, sources vary between 20,000 and 40,000 years, elves served the giants as scribes, assistants, craftspeople, and scholars. The giants valued elven dexterity and their natural affinity for certain forms of magic. Elven hands could carve details too fine for giant fingers. Elven minds could track minutiae that bored giant intellects. The elves learned giant magic, giant craftsmanship, giant philosophy. They absorbed knowledge that made them the most magically advanced elves in all of Eberron. But they remained slaves. The giants treated them relatively well compared to other servant races, granting them considerable freedom and intellectual respect. But the fundamental relationship never changed. An elf could never rise above their station, never command a giant, never own property, never make choices about their own lives. They existed to serve, and service meant obedience. Over those many millennia, the elves changed. Constant exposure to the intense, magical energies of giant civilization altered them physically and spiritually. Their skin darkened, adapting to the underground workshops and chambers where they spent most of their time. Their eyes became more sensitive, better suited to the dim light of subterranean spaces. Their natural elven grace took on a sharper edge, their movements becoming predatory rather than merely fluid. But the most significant change occurred in their minds. Living under giant rule, witnessing daily the sheer power that their masters wielded, the elves developed a hunger for that same power. Based on artifacts and writings recovered from drow settlements, we can infer that they began secretly teaching themselves the most dangerous forms of giant magic, hiding their studies from their masters, building clandestine libraries in forgotten corners of the underworld. When the dragons came, when Argonesans' scaled armies devastated Xendrik and laid their terrible curses upon the land, the elves saw their opportunity. The giant empire shattered under dragon fire. The survivors fell into chaos, their civilization collapsing, the Darashka Tull curse turning them against each other whenever they attempted to organize. In this moment of ultimate giant weakness, the elves rose up in coordinated rebellions across Xendrik, targeting weakened giant strongholds, claiming magical artifacts, seizing control of underground territories. Many elves fled Xendrik entirely during this period. They sailed to Eberron, carrying stories of the continent's horrors that would convince the Eberron elves to declare Xendrik forever forbidden. The Eberron were shocked by their cousin's transformed appearance and refused them entry, fearing that whatever curse had changed them might somehow spread to pure elven bloodlines. The elves who remained in Xendrik, or who were refused refuge elsewhere, had no choice but to embrace their transformation. They descended deeper into the underworld, establishing settlements in caverns that the giants had once used for storage or ritual purposes. They discovered that prolonged exposure to sunlight now caused them pain and weakness, that their connection to the natural world had withered. They had become something new, something darker, drow. Over the following millennia, the drow fragmented into distinct cultures, each developing their own response to freedom after tens of thousands of years of servitude. 3 major drow civilizations emerged, each taking a different path. The Umbrigen represent the most numerous and perhaps the most fanatical of the drow cultures. They make their homes in the deepest reaches of Khyber, in caverns so far beneath the surface that the rock itself radiates heat. The Umbrigen discovered, and now worship what they call the umbral flame, though scholars debate whether this represents an actual entity or simply a source of shadow magic that the Umbrigen have personified. This dark power grants them abilities beyond those of normal drow, allowing them to meld with darkness, to become invisible in anything less than direct sunlight, to manipulate shadows as weapons. The umbral flame demands absolute devotion in return for its gifts. Umbragen society operates as a theocracy where priestesses of the flame hold absolute authority. To question the flame means death. To refuse its call means exile into the deadly tunnels beyond Umbragen territory. Young Umbragen undergo trials where they must prove their devotion, and those who fail these tests do not survive to speak of their failure. The Umbragen remember the age of slavery with bitter clarity. Their oral traditions preserve stories of the worst aspects of giant rule, of elves worked to death in the forges, of families separated when giants sold individuals to distant settlements. This historical trauma drives their obsession with strength and their fierce independence. Based on their cultural practices and their refusal to engage in diplomacy with surface nations, this could imply that no Umbragen will ever willingly serve another being again. They would die fighting rather than submit to outside authority. The Suletter Drow have taken a completely different path. Where the Umbragen embraced shadow, the Suletter claimed fire. They settled in regions of intense volcanic activity, particularly near the ancient giant city of Praxirk. In caverns where lava flows create rivers of molten stone, the Suletter learned to bind fire elementals, forming pacts that granted them mastery over flame itself. The Suletter see themselves as the true inheritors of giant fire magic. During their time as slaves, many Suletter ancestors worked in the giant forges, learning the secrets of metallurgy and elemental binding. When the giants fell, they claimed those forges for themselves, taking the giant techniques and developing them further over tens of millennia. A Suletter smith can forge weapons that burn with perpetual flame, armor that protects its wearer from extreme temperatures, tools that never dull because they cut with fire as much as with physical edges. The Suletter have tattooed their bodies with intricate patterns using special inks and bound fire elementals. These tattoos serve as both decoration and magical focus, allowing the Suletter to channel elemental fire through their very skin. This could imply a level of elemental mastery that even modern House Lyrandar airship elementalists have not achieved, though direct comparisons remain difficult given the secretive nature of both groups. The Suletter maintain control over portions of Praxirk, guarding the city's ancient forges jealously. They allow no outsiders to approach their most sacred sites, killing intruders without warning or negotiation. Based on expedition reports from survivors who have encountered them, we can assume they view the city as rightfully theirs by virtue of their ancestors, having labored there during the Age of Giants. The Valkyrie Drow chose yet another path entirely. They rejected the deep darkness of the Umbragen and the volcanic fury of the Suletter, instead settling in the transition zones between the deep underworld and the surface. The Valkyrie worship scorpions not as symbols, but as literal sacred beings. They believe that when the elves first achieved freedom, scorpions aided them in their rebellion against the giants. Though whether this belief reflects historical fact or mythologized memory remains unclear to outside scholars. The Valkyrie breed scorpions of every size, from specimens small enough to hide in a closed fist to massive creatures the size of horses that serve as mounts and war beasts. They have developed immunity to most scorpion venoms through generations of intentional exposure. And their poison masters can create compounds of terrifying potency. Valkyrie assassins rank among the most feared in all of Xendrik, for they strike from the shadows with poisoned blades and disappear before their victims realize they have been touched by death. Young Valkyrie undergo trials where they must survive alone in scorpion breeding chambers, learning to move as scorpions move, to embody the patient deadliness of their sacred creatures. Those who succeed in these trials sometimes develop what appears to be an almost supernatural connection to scorpions. Though whether this represents genuine magical bonding or simply exceptional training remains debated among scholars who study drow cultures. Yet the drow do not hold a monopoly on Xendrik's underworld. The Yuan-Ti, serpent folk with human features and reptilian qualities, control vast territories in the southwestern regions of the continent. The Yuan-Ti claim to have lived in Xendrik long before the giants rose to power, suggesting they witnessed the continent's transformation from a land of primordial jungles into the seat of giant civilization. Whether this claim holds truth or represents Yuan-Ti arrogance cannot be verified, though they certainly possess knowledge of places and powers that even the drow respect. The Yuan-Ti organize themselves into a strict hierarchy based on the degree of serpentine qualities each individual possesses. The purebloods, who appear almost entirely human save for subtle reptilian features, form the lowest caste. Half-bloods with more obvious serpent qualities occupy the middle ranks. The abominations, massive beings with giant serpent bodies and humanoid torsos, rule as priest kings and archmages. Yuan-Ti civilization revolves around temples dedicated to entities they call the Dark Principalities, powerful serpentine spirits that grant magical power in exchange for worship and sacrifice. These temples descend deep into Khyber, and explorers who have glimpsed their architecture report impossible angles that seem to fold space in on itself. The Yuan-Ti practice dark rituals that can transform other humanoids into serpent folk, though this transformation destroys the victim's original personality. The relationship between Yuan-Ti and drow remains tense and complex. The two peoples trade when mutual benefit suggests cooperation, but they also war frequently, fighting over territories rich in magical resources and over ancient artifacts discovered in giant ruins. Among the surface of Xendrik, human cultures have emerged from the chaos following the giant empire's fall. These humans descended from slaves and servants that the giants kept for tasks requiring smaller hands and shorter lifespans than elves provided. When the giants fell, these humans scattered into the jungles, forming tribal societies adapted to the continent's dangers through generations of brutal natural selection. The largest human population centers around what would later become Stormreach and the nearby coastal regions. These humans learned to build villages that could be abandoned and rebuilt quickly. When the traveler's curse shifted the landscape, they developed oral traditions that preserved survival knowledge, which plants were edible, which water sources remained safe, how to recognize the warning signs that precede a magical disaster. The Seren tribes in the northwestern reaches worship ancestor spirits and maintain shamanistic traditions. Based on their cultural practices, this could imply that they possess some limited protection against Xendrik's magical distortions, though the exact mechanisms remain unclear to outside observers. The ancestors of House Tharashk established themselves in resource-rich regions and developed early techniques for locating dragon shards. These humans bred with native orc and half-orc populations, creating bloodlines that combined human adaptability with orcish resilience. They built no permanent settlements, instead following dragon shard deposits in endless migration patterns. The orcs of Xendrik, unlike their counterparts in Corvair, never developed large-scale civilizations. They live in small bands, following game through the jungles, avoiding the ruins that other races plunder. Orcish shamans possess deep understanding of Xendrik's primal forces, tapping into magic that may predate even the giant empire. The halflings of Xendrik present perhaps the most mysterious of the continent's peoples. They claim no history, keep no written records, and seem to appear and disappear according to patterns that others cannot perceive. Halfling guides sometimes approach explorers at desperate moments, leading them to safety through impossible terrain, then vanishing without accepting payment or explanation. Some scholars theorize that the halflings possess natural immunity to the traveler's curse, though halflings themselves refuse to discuss such matters with outsiders. Deep beneath everything, in caverns that descend into regions where even the drow fear to venture, other things dwell. The Daelker, those alien beings who invaded Eberron from Zulkur approximately 12,000 years ago, left servants and creations throughout Xendrik's deepest reaches. Dalgaunts and Dalgrim hunt in packs through lightless passages. Mind flayers maintain small enclaves where they conduct experiments that would horrify any surface dweller. All these peoples, drow in their many cultures, Yuan-ti in their serpent temples, humans struggling to survive on the surface, orcs following ancient migratory patterns, halflings walking paths that only they can see, and the aberrations lurking in the deepest, dark, share Xendrik. They compete for resources, fight over territory, occasionally trade or cooperate when necessity demands it. They have replaced the giants as the continent's inhabitants, but they have not replaced the giants' power. The ruins surround them, dwarf them, remind them daily that they live in the shadow of something greater than they can ever hope to become. A drow warrior might claim a giant palace as their stronghold, but they occupy perhaps 3 rooms of a structure containing thousands. The humans, the orcs, the halflings, all of them survive in the margins of a dead civilization whose least works exceed their greatest achievements. And yet they endure. They adapt. They learn the continent's dangers and develop strategies to survive them. They pass down knowledge through generations, building slowly, carefully, creating cultures that may never approach giant glory, but that possess their own unique strengths. The peoples of Xendrik live not in the age of giants, but in the age after giants, and they have made that age their own. The drow certainly believe they can thrive in this new era. They were slaves for tens of thousands of years, and they freed themselves. They adapted to a curse that transformed their very nature, and they turned that curse into strength. They descended into darkness, and they made darkness their kingdom. Whatever the future holds for Xendrik, whatever powers rise or fall in the ages to come, the drow will be there, watching from the shadows, patient as they have always been, ready to seize opportunity when it presents itself. Because that is what survivors do. And if Xendrik has taught its inhabitants anything across 39,000 years of catastrophe and curse, it is how to survive. Section 3. Stormreach and the Gateway to Mystery. Where the jungle meets the sea, where the black stone cliffs descend into waters that churn with unnatural currents, a city clings to existence like a barnacle on a shipwreck. Stormreach should not exist. Every law of nature, every principle of sound settlement, every lesson learned from millennia of failed colonization attempts, suggests that no permanent human habitation could survive on Xendrik's hostile shores. Yet Stormreach endures, growing larger each year, drawing adventurers and scholars and fortune seekers from across Corvair like moths to a flame that will likely consume them. You smell the city before you see it. A mixture of salt spray, exotic spices, unwashed bodies, and something else. Something that carries on the wind from the interior. A scent like ozone, and decay that speaks of ancient powers stirring in their sleep. The harbor comes into view as your ship rounds the final headland, and you see structures that were never meant to house the living. Giant ruins form the foundation of the city, massive stone blocks that have stood for tens of thousands of years, now supporting warehouses and taverns, temples and brothels. All the infrastructure of humanoid civilization built like tumors on the bones of dead gods. The history of Stormreach begins not with noble intentions or colonial ambitions, but with the simplest of motivations, desperation and greed. Approximately 800 years ago, the waters around Xendrik attracted pirates, fleeing the increasingly effective naval patrols of the Five Nations. These corsairs needed bases where they could repair ships, divide plunder, and hide from authorities, and Xendrik offered perfect isolation. The continent's reputation kept honest sailors away, and the magical distortions that plagued the interior created natural protection against organized military expeditions. The first pirates established temporary camps along the coast, nothing more than tents and crude docks that they abandoned when not actively using. But one captain, a human woman named Eberron, recognized opportunity where others saw merely refuge. She claimed the ruins around what would become Stormreach Harbor, the remnants of an ancient giant port facility that had somehow survived the devastation, largely intact. The massive stone quays could accommodate ships of any size. The warehouses, though crumbling, provided storage space. The defensive positions overlooking the harbor made the location nearly impregnable. Delura established permanent settlement, bringing in shipwrights and craftspeople, setting up taverns and supply stores. Other pirate captains, seeing the advantages of a reliable base, began using Delura's harbor regularly. Within a decade, what started as one woman's claim had become a thriving community of outlaws, a place where captains from different crews could meet without immediately drawing weapons, where stolen goods could be fenced without questions, where ship repairs could be completed without authorities interfering. But Xendrik would not allow such simple exploitation of its resources. The pirates learned quickly that venturing into the interior meant death. Crews that explored the nearby jungles seeking additional loot discovered ruins that killed in 1,000 different ways. Magical traps still functioned after millennia. Guardian constructs awakened to defend spaces long forgotten. The landscape itself shifted, leaving explorers hopelessly lost within miles of the settlement. The pirates adapted by staying close to the coast, by learning which ruins could be safely approached and which demanded avoidance. The transformation from pirate haven to expedition hub began approximately 200 years ago, when the dragon-marked houses started taking interest in Xendrik's resources. House Lyrandar established shipping contracts, offering safe passage to Xendrik for those willing to pay premium rates. House Kundarak began financing expeditions, providing funds in exchange for percentages of recovered artifacts. House Tharashk, with their dragon shard expertise, sent prospectors to survey coastal regions for accessible deposits. The houses brought legitimacy and capital. They built proper docks, established warehouses with magical preservation, created financial systems that allowed for investment in large-scale expeditions. The pirates, recognizing that they could profit more from serving this new clientele than from robbing them, gradually transitioned into different roles. Former corsairs became ship captains specializing in dangerous waters, guides who knew the coastal regions, security personnel who understood violence in ways that house guards never would. The population exploded as word spread of opportunities in Stormreach. Adventurers arrived seeking fortune in the ruins. Scholars came seeking knowledge lost to the modern age. Merchants established trading posts, dealing in exotic goods and recovered artifacts. Within decades, the population had grown from a few hundred pirates to several thousand permanent residents, with countless others passing through on expeditions or waiting for ships back to Corvair. But this growth created problems. No formal government existed. Pirate tradition rejected authority structures beyond individual ship crews. Different factions competed for control of the best docks, the most profitable trade routes, the most knowledgeable guides. Violence erupted regularly as disputes escalated. The dragon-marked houses, concerned about protecting their investments, demanded someone establish order. The solution came from an unexpected source. 5 individuals, each commanding significant resources and loyal followers, formed what became known as the Coin Lords, though some sources suggest they were originally called the Storm Lords. These 5 essentially staged a coup, using their combined forces to crush opposition and establish themselves as Stormreach's de facto government. They presented this to the dragon-marked houses as necessary stabilization, as the creation of law and order that would protect house interests. The houses accepted this explanation, though everyone involved understood the truth. The Coin Lords had simply organized the city's strongest power brokers into a ruling cartel, but a stable cartel proved preferable to constant chaos, so the arrangement endured. The Coin Lords established rules governing trade, created a city guard to enforce basic laws, designated districts for different purposes, and claimed authority over who could lead expeditions into the interior. These 5 individuals ran Stormreach as a business rather than a city. They charged fees for everything: dock usage, market stall permits, expedition licenses, even basic protection services. They maintained just enough order to keep the dragon-marked houses satisfied, while allowing enough chaos to ensure that desperate or foolish individuals would pay premium rates for services that the Coin Lords themselves provided, based on the city's continued prosperity. This could imply a brilliant exploitation of both Xendrik's dangers and Corvair's desperation for what the ruins contained. The city grew according to no rational plan. Buildings rose wherever space existed, often incorporating sections of ancient giant structures. The Temple District occupied what had been a giant religious complex, with new temples to the sovereign host and other faiths built inside chambers that once hosted rituals to forgotten giant deities. The marketplace sprawled across an enormous plaza, paved with stones, each weighing several tons, immune to weather or wear. The harbor district used giant quays that required no maintenance, perfect after tens of thousands of years beneath sun and storm. The contrast between ancient and modern creates the defining character of Stormreach. You walk through streets where wooden shacks lean against walls carved with precision that modern masons cannot replicate. You shop in markets where merchants hawk their wares beneath ceilings decorated with murals showing giant lords in their glory. You sleep in inns built inside structures that once housed beings who could crush your skull with casual gestures. The city exists as a parasite on giant corpses, and everyone who lives there knows it. The population of Stormreach reflects Xendrik's diversity. Humans form the majority, with representatives from all 5 nations mixed with native Xendrik tribes. Drow walk openly through the streets, no longer bound to the underworld, serving as guides and brokers who understand the continent's dangers. Half-elves, often the children of Corvair elves and Xendrik drow, occupy middle positions in society, trusted by neither heritage, but valued for their ability to bridge cultural gaps. Halflings run many of the city's taverns and gambling houses. The occasional giant, usually a stone giant with enough intelligence remaining to trade, visits to exchange information or artifacts for supplies. But the real power in Stormreach belongs to the factions. The Coin Lords maintain overall control, but beneath them, dozens of different organizations compete for influence and wealth. House Kundarak operates massive vaults where adventurers can store recovered artifacts with absolute security for a percentage of the item's value, naturally. House Lyrandar controls shipping, ensuring that their vessels receive priority docking. House Tharashk maintains Dragonshard prospecting operations, sending teams deep into dangerous territory with the best guides that money or favor can secure. The Church of the Silver Flame established a significant presence in recent decades, building a cathedral and sending missionaries. Based on their activities and the types of expeditions they sponsor, we can infer that the Church's true goal has less to do with saving souls and more with seeking artifacts and knowledge related to binding and destroying evil, particularly anything connected to the Daelker and other aberrations. The Gatekeepers, an ancient druidic sect, maintain a subtle presence in Stormreach. They rarely reveal themselves openly, instead working through intermediaries and fronts. The Gatekeepers focus on preventing anyone from accessing certain ruins, particularly those connected to the Daelker invasion. They have been known to sabotage expeditions, even to eliminate scholars who ask too many questions about the wrong topics. The cults of the dragon below operate throughout Stormreach, though identifying their members proves difficult. These cults worship the Daelker, or the aberrations that serve them, seeking to release ancient evils from their prisons deep beneath Xendrik. They infiltrate other organizations, posing as scholars or merchants, while secretly directing expeditions toward specific ruins. The Chamber, that ancient organization of dragons dedicated to understanding the draconic prophecy, watches Stormreach from the shadows. Their agents appear as humans or other races, using magic to disguise their true forms, based on draconic behavior patterns documented elsewhere in Eberron. This could imply that they work to ensure certain expeditions succeed while others fail, manipulating events according to their interpretation of prophecy. The harbor remains the city's beating heart. Dozens of ships crowd the docks at any given time. House Lyrandar elemental galleons, smaller independent vessels, even occasional ancient ships powered by magics that modern sailors cannot understand. The air rings with 100 languages as crews from across Corvair mix with local guides. As merchants negotiate prices, as adventurers seek passage to remote coastal regions, the marketplace offers goods found nowhere else in Eberron. You can purchase artifacts recovered from ruins, jewelry, tools, weapons, armor, all crafted with giant skill, and often still bearing enchantments after tens of thousands of years. You can buy maps, though their accuracy varies wildly due to the traveler's curse. You can hire guides who claim to know safe paths through specific ruins, though verifying such claims proves impossible until you venture into danger with them. The black market operates openly if you know where to look. Certain taverns serve as fronts for dealers in stolen artifacts, in objects that the coin lords have declared illegal, in substances extracted from creatures or plants found only in Xendrik's deadliest regions. The coin lords maintain control over these operations, finding them more profitable than allowing unregulated trade to flourish. The expeditions launched from Stormreach follow patterns established over 2 centuries of trial and error. Small groups, usually 6 to 10 individuals, hire a guide and secure provisions for journeys lasting weeks or months. They purchase maps and set off into the jungle with hope and determination. Most return empty-handed, having found ruins already thoroughly plundered or locations impossible to reach safely. Some return with minor artifacts that barely cover their expenses. A lucky few discover treasures that make them wealthy. Many never return at all. The jungle consumes them. Ruins kill them. The traveler's curse transports them somewhere impossible to escape. Their fate becomes another warning story told in Stormreach's taverns. Another lesson about Xendrik's dangers that the next group of ambitious adventurers will ignore. These stories should deter people. They should create caution, inspire careful planning, generate respect for Xendrik's dangers. Instead, they feed the obsession. Every failed expedition suggests that something valuable remains hidden. Every death proves that the ruins still contain treasures worth protecting. Every curse and monster and trap represents an obstacle to overcome. Stormreach exists to serve this obsession. The entire city operates as an industry dedicated to facilitating the exploration and exploitation of Xendrik's ruins. Every merchant, every guide, every tavern keeper profits from the endless stream of adventurers who arrive seeking glory and wealth. The coin lords grow richer with each expedition, whether it succeeds or fails. The dragon-marked houses expand their influence through controlling access to the continent. The city maintains a strange combination of cynicism and hope. The permanent residents view each new group of adventurers with weary resignation. They have seen this pattern repeat hundreds of times: enthusiastic arrivals, confident proclamations, dramatic departures into the jungle, then silence or disappointing returns, or occasionally surprising success followed by swift departure to corvair with the spoils. Yet hope persists, because sometimes someone does find something remarkable. Sometimes an expedition discovers ruins untouched since the fall of the giant empire. Sometimes an adventurer emerges from the jungle carrying an artifact of immense power or value. These moments, rare as they are, justify all the failures. You stand now in Stormreach, surrounded by the evidence of past triumphs and failures, breathing air thick with anticipation and decay. The jungle looms beyond the city's crumbling walls, waiting with patient hunger. The ruins call to you with promises of power and knowledge. The city offers everything you need to attempt the impossible: equipment, guides, maps, allies. The night falls over Stormreach, and the city transforms. Taverns fill with voices raised in song and argument. The marketplace quiets as legitimate merchants close their stalls, while black market dealers emerge to conduct business in shadowed alleys. Yet the jungle never quiets. The ruins never rest. And somewhere out there in the darkness, in places marked on no map, in structures built by beings who approached godhood, treasures wait for those courageous or foolish enough to seek them. Stormreach stands ready to launch you toward those treasures. Everything you need exists here. Every preparation can be made. Whether you survive what comes next depends on factors beyond the city's control: your skill, your luck, your ability to navigate dangers that have killed countless others. The question remains: will you be the next legend or merely the next cautionary tale? Section 4. The Living Land: Perils Beyond Comprehension. The jungle begins at the edge of Stormreach's last crumbling wall, separated from civilization by perhaps 20 paces of cleared ground that the city maintains through constant effort. Each morning, workers hack back vines that grew overnight, remove saplings that sprouted between the cobblestones, burn away creeping moss that advances like a living carpet. This daily battle represents Stormreach's acknowledgement of a fundamental truth: the land itself wants the city gone. Xendrik tolerates human presence the way your body tolerates a splinter, with constant low-level rejection that will eventually succeed in expelling the foreign presence. When you cross that boundary, when you step from the cleared zone into the vegetation beyond, you enter territory governed by rules that make no rational sense. The compass in your hand spins wildly, unable to find true north because magnetic fields shift hourly in response to underground forces. The map you purchased in Stormreach, drawn by an experienced guide who swears to its accuracy, leads you to a river that flows uphill, to a mountain that was a valley yesterday, to ruins that the cartographer visited last month, but that clearly have not seen visitors in millennia, based on the undisturbed dust coating every surface. This is the traveler's curse manifesting in its most accessible form. The continent remembers the devastation wrought by dragons 39,000 years ago, when Argonesans' flights unleashed epic curses to ensure the giants could never threaten the world again. The traveler's curse fundamentally altered Xendrik's relationship with reality itself. The laws of nature that govern the rest of Eberron apply here only sporadically, only when the land permits, only until it decides to change the rules again. You might walk for 3 days through normal jungle, sweating in the humid heat, fighting through vegetation that behaves exactly as vegetation should. Then, without warning, without any sign of transition, you find yourself in a region where the curse manifests more strongly. Based on expedition reports from survivors, this could imply that certain areas experience more intense curse effects than others, perhaps due to proximity to sites where the dragons focused their destructive magic, or where the giant empire's magical infrastructure concentrated power. Your companions might suddenly appear to move in slow motion, their voices dropping to impossibly deep registers, while you perceive everything at normal speed. Or perhaps the reverse occurs. They seem to move impossibly fast, while you struggle through subjective hours to complete actions that take them mere seconds. The traveler's curse warps the flow of time itself in unpredictable ways. Other regions display different anomalies. You might enter an area where gravity weakens, where each step carries you dozens of feet into the air, forcing you to move with agonizing care, lest you launch yourself into the canopy and become hopelessly tangled in vines hundreds of feet above the ground. You might discover zones where magic refuses to function, where spells fizzle before casting, where magical items become inert lumps of metal and crystal. You might stumble into pockets where wild magic runs rampant, where attempting the simplest cantrip triggers explosive releases of energy that transform the landscape around you. The jungle itself responds to these magical distortions with mutations that defy natural law. Trees grow in impossible configurations, their trunks twisted into spirals, their branches forming patterns that hurt to observe too closely. Based on botanical studies conducted by House Vadali's researchers, we can infer that the ambient magic accelerates mutation rates far beyond what natural evolution would produce, creating species that could not exist anywhere else in Eberron. The animals of Xendrik have adapted to these conditions through evolution, accelerated by magical contamination. You encounter predators that display capabilities unknown in their Corvair counterparts, creatures with breath weapons, with telepathic coordination, with the ability to phase between planes. Whether these represent entirely new species or magically enhanced versions of standard animals remains a subject of scholarly debate. But the animals, for all their danger, represent merely another natural hazard. The true threats are those that the giants left behind, the constructs and guardians and bound spirits that still follow orders given tens of thousands of years ago by masters who have long since crumbled to dust. The Titan constructs stride through Xendrik like mobile catastrophes. These massive creations of giant artifice stand hundreds of feet tall, powered by elemental cores that continue functioning millennia after their creators' deaths. The giants built these constructs to serve specific purposes, some as guardians, some as excavators, some as weapons. When the dragons devastated the Empire, the constructs lost their controlling operators, but did not shut down. Now they wander according to last orders, or according to damaged decision matrices that produce unpredictable and lethal behaviors. A Titan construct programmed to guard a palace might still be slowly walking toward that location, crushing everything in its path, oblivious to the fact that its destination was vaporized millennia ago, based on observed behavior patterns. This could imply that the constructs retain some form of memory or directive that survives even catastrophic damage to their control systems. When you hear the footsteps, when the ground shakes with impacts that rattle your teeth and topple trees, you run. You do not investigate. You do not attempt communication. The constructs serve their ancient purposes with mechanical precision. And if you happen to be in their way, you die. Lesser constructs pose different threats. Giant-made guardians the size of buildings patrol specific ruins, attacking intruders with weapons that range from mundane to magical to completely inexplicable. You might face a construct that fires beams of disintegration. You might encounter one that manipulates gravity, crushing victims under their own multiplied weight. You might stumble into a guardian that attacks the mind rather than the body, projecting psychic assaults. But constructs at least possess the virtue of some predictability. They follow programming, respond to stimuli in relatively consistent ways. Living spells offer no such mercy. Living spells represent one of Xendrik's most unusual threats. These entities are spells that have achieved independent existence, becoming creatures of pure magic that haunt the places where they were originally cast. The catastrophic magical energies released during the giant empire's fall, whether from the moon breaker's activation or from the dragon's devastation, allowed some spells to transcend their normal boundaries and become living things. You round a corner in a ruin and encounter a living fireball, a sphere of flame that pulses with apparent awareness, that pursues you with deliberate intent, that explodes with devastating force when it catches its prey. You enter a chamber and trigger a living lightning bolt that arcs through the air seeking targets, splitting and recombining, chaining between victims. You open a door and face a living cloudkill, a poisonous fog that flows like liquid that follows you through corridors. The living spells display rudimentary intelligence, enough to pursue prey, to spring ambushes, to retreat when faced with threats they cannot overcome. Based on their observed behaviors, some scholars theorize that the living spells represent fragments of consciousness trapped in magical form, though others argue that they are entirely new entities created by the transformation from spell to living magic. Whatever their nature, they make ruin exploration infinitely more dangerous. Traditional adventuring wisdom suggests checking for traps, watching for pressure plates and tripwires. Living spells require no triggers. They attack when they desire, or they desire, according to patterns that shift and change. The Ring of Cyberes creates its own unique hazards throughout Xendrik. This band of enormous dragon shards orbits Eberron directly above the equator, and Xendrik's location means that Cyberes shards fall regularly across the continent. These crystal fragments, some as small as pebbles and others as large as buildings, carry immense magical power. They represent pieces of Cyberes himself, the dragon above, whose body now forms the ring that bears his name. Where Cyberes shards impact the ground, they warp reality in unpredictable ways. A small shard might create a zone where specific types of magic become dramatically more powerful. A large shard might establish a permanent portal to another plane. The most powerful shards terraform the landscape around them, creating impossible geographies where the barrier between past and present grows thin. The dragon-marked houses pay fortunes for Cyberes shards, particularly House Cannith for their artifice. Professional dragon shard hunters spend their lives searching Xendrik for these fallen treasures, using specialized detection equipment, following reports of unusual phenomena. Most die in the attempt, but the potential rewards justify the risks for those desperate or ambitious enough. Eberron shards, formed from the body of Eberron herself, lie scattered throughout Xendrik in concentrations that exceed anywhere else on the planet. The giant empire consumed vast quantities of Eberron shards for their magic, mining them extensively, creating deposits that modern prospectors can exploit. House Tharashk maintains operations to recover these shards, their prospectors using mark-enhanced abilities to locate deposits hidden deep in the jungle. Kyber shards present the greatest danger. Formed from the body of Kyber, the dragon below, these dark crystals naturally attract aberrations and fuel the vilest magics. The Daelker used Kyber shards extensively during their invasion, approximately 12,000 years ago, corrupting the dragon shards to serve as anchors, keeping portals to Xulkur open. The gatekeepers focus much of their attention on locating and neutralizing Kyber shard deposits. They perform rituals that seal the shards behind magical wards, preventing their corrupting influence from spreading. But Xendrik contains thousands of such deposits, far more than the gatekeepers can ever hope to secure. Dead magic zones scatter across Xendrik like wounds in reality. In these areas, magic simply stops functioning. Spells fail before casting. Magical items become inert. Even divine magic cannot penetrate the suppression these zones enforce. Based on their distribution patterns, this could imply that some zones formed during the cataclysm, while others were deliberately created by the giants as prisons or research areas. Walking into a dead magic zone unprepared means death for spellcasters who rely on magic for protection. The wizard whose contingency spells keep them safe suddenly finds those protections vanished. Smart explorers test areas ahead for dead magic zones. But the zones sometimes move, expanding and contracting according to patterns observers have failed to predict. Wild magic zones represent the opposite extreme areas where magic becomes dangerously unstable. Casting any spell in a wild magic zone risks catastrophic results. A simple light spell might explode with the force of a fireball. A healing spell might drain life instead of restoring it. The bound elementals that powered giant civilization remain trapped in their bindings. Immortal spirits slowly going mad from tens of thousands of years of imprisonment without purpose. The giants bound fire elementals to heat forges, water elementals to power fountains, air elementals to ventilate chambers, earth elementals to strengthen foundations. When the giants died, the bindings persisted, preventing the elementals from returning to their home planes. Some elementals retain enough awareness to interact with explorers, begging for release and offering information or treasure in exchange. But other bindings incorporated safeguards that cause structures to collapse if the elemental escapes. Trust becomes impossible. Does the elemental genuinely offer fair trade? Or does it simply seek freedom regardless of the cost? The spirits of dead giants sometimes linger in places where they died. These ghosts retain fragmented memories of their former lives, of the Empire's glory, of the moment when everything ended. Some remain hostile, attacking anyone who enters their territory. Others seem confused, attempting to complete tasks that made sense tens of thousands of years ago, but that have become meaningless. The jungle itself functions as an active threat beyond its role as habitat for dangerous creatures. The vegetation grows with unnatural speed, as if guided by collective consciousness that perceives intruders as prey. Certain plant species have developed predatory behaviors through magical mutation. Vines animate and attack when prey comes within range. Trees drop pods containing acid or poison. Flowers release spores that induce paralysis or hallucinations. When night falls, Xendrik's dangers multiply exponentially. Creatures that hide during daylight emerge to hunt. Magical phenomena intensify as the moons rise, their influence somehow amplifying the continent's instabilities. The temperature can drop dramatically despite the tropical latitude, sometimes plunging below freezing in mere hours. You learn to respect the night in Xendrik. You establish camps in defensible positions with clear sight lines. You post watches throughout the darkness. You avoid using bright lights that might attract attention from miles away. You remain still and quiet, understanding that sound carries far in the jungle. Yet even with every precaution, even with experienced guides and powerful magic and careful planning, Xendrik claims victims. The land itself seems to possess malevolent will, working against anyone who ventures into its depths. It shifts terrain to disorient travelers. It manifests new hazards where none existed the previous day. It draws you deeper with promises of discovery while simultaneously preparing your destruction. This is Xendrik's essential nature, a land so saturated with magic, so fundamentally altered by catastrophic forces, so completely divorced from normal reality that survival becomes as much about luck as skill. The dragon's curses ensure that the continent remains dangerous, that exploration remains difficult, that no civilization can rise to threaten Argonessen again. And still you press forward, driven by ambition or curiosity or desperation, seeking whatever treasures you believe justify the risks. The ruins call to you with their secrets. The jungle promises discoveries that might change everything. The very dangers that should turn you back instead pull you deeper. Because if Xendrik protects something this fiercely, surely that something must be worth claiming. The land waits for you to test that assumption. It has waited for 39,000 years, and it will wait for 39,000 more, patient as stone, hungry as fire, inevitable as death itself. Section 5. Secrets beneath the canopy and the prophecies echo. The stones remember prophecy. Every column in every ruin, every cliff face touched by dragon claws, every natural formation where dragon shards cluster in meaningful patterns, all of them bear marks that comprise the draconic prophecy, that vast cosmic narrative written into the fabric of Eberron itself. The dragons who deciphered portions of this prophecy believe it predicts everything that has happened and everything that will happen across all of time. Xendrik contains more prophecy markings than any other continent, concentrated here because the giant empires rise and fall represented events significant enough to warrant extensive documentation in the universe's underlying code. When you walk through Xendrik's ruins, when you see carvings that seem decorative or meaningless, you might be standing before passages of the prophecy without recognizing them. The markings appear in Draconic, that ancient language that predates all mortal tongues, written in symbols that shift meaning based on celestial positions, on the observer's perspective, on countless contextual factors that make translation monumentally difficult, even for those who have studied the prophecy for centuries. Based on what scholars have documented about the prophecy's nature, we can infer that a single character might mean different things under different astronomical conditions, and a sequence of marks could predict an individual's birth or describe the end of civilizations, depending on interpretation. The Chamber, that secretive organization of dragons dedicated to understanding and manipulating the prophecy, maintains extensive operations throughout Xendrik. Their agents, usually disguised as members of other races through powerful illusion magic, observe events unfolding across the continent. They watch specific ruins, waiting for prophesied individuals to arrive. They manipulate circumstances to ensure that certain artifacts reach designated recipients at predetermined moments. The Chamber believes that the prophecy is not merely predictive, but prescriptive, that by ensuring events unfold according to their interpretation of the marks, they guide reality toward optimal outcomes. What constitutes optimal remains unclear, for the Chamber shares its goals with no one outside their organization. They have worked for thousands of years toward objectives they refuse to explain, manipulating nations and individuals according to their reading of destiny. You might encounter a Chamber agent without realizing it. The human scholar offering to share information about a ruin could be a silver dragon in disguise, steering you toward a location where the prophecy indicates your presence becomes significant based on documented Chamber operations elsewhere in Eberron. This could imply that many seemingly chance encounters in Stormreach are actually carefully orchestrated meetings designed to advance prophecy fulfillment. The Chamber's methods often appear cruel by mortal standards. They allow disasters to unfold when the prophecy suggests such events serve larger purposes. They sacrifice individuals without hesitation when doing so advances their interpretation. They view mortal lives as inherently temporary, as brief moments in narratives that extend across ages. The Lords of Dust, those ancient Rakshasas who serve corrupted dragon spirits, pursue their own interpretation of the prophecy. These immortal fiends believe that the prophecy predicts the eventual release of the dragon below, of Kyber herself breaking free from imprisonment within the world. The Lords of Dust work toward this apocalyptic outcome with patience measured in millennia, setting events in motion that cascade across generations. Where the Chamber seeks to guide the prophecy toward what they consider beneficial outcomes, the Lords of Dust actively work to corrupt it, to twist events toward darkness and destruction. They infiltrate mortal civilizations, establishing cults that worship the dragon below. They manipulate wars and disasters. They recover artifacts of terrible power and deliver them to individuals most likely to misuse them catastrophically. The Lords of Dust maintain strongholds throughout Xendrik, particularly in regions heavily marked by the prophecy. These immortal beings established themselves on the continent long before the giant empire rose. Based on their age and their knowledge of ancient events, we can assume they witnessed the dragon's devastation of the giant civilization and have incorporated that cataclysm into their long-term planning. Their agents move through mortal society with consummate skill, their shape-shifting abilities allowing them to assume any form. A Rakshasa might spend decades establishing an identity as a trusted merchant or scholar, building reputation and connections, all to ensure that when the crucial moment arrives, they occupy the perfect position to nudge events in their preferred direction. The dreaming dark, though severed from Eberron, when the giants cut Dal Quor loose from the material plane, has not abandoned interest in Xendrik. The quarry entities trapped in the region of dreams still seek ways to influence the waking world, to rebuild the invasion force that the giants shattered at such terrible cost, based on their historical obsession with returning to Eberron. This could imply that the dreaming dark believes somewhere in Xendrik's ruins lies knowledge that might allow them to restore Dal Quor's connection to the material plane. The quarry cannot directly enter Eberron anymore, cannot possess mortals as they once did, but they can still reach into dreams. Anyone who sleeps within Xendrik's boundaries becomes vulnerable to quarry influence, particularly in regions where the barriers between planes grow thin. The dreaming dark sends visions, plants suggestions, cultivates desires that serve their long-term goals. The inspired, those humans from Sarlona whose bodies host quarry spirits, sometimes venture to Xendrik on missions for the dreaming dark. These individuals possess the resources and determination to mount serious expeditions, to overcome obstacles that would stop normal explorers. They seek ruins connected to the original war against Dal Quor, searching for documentation of the ritual that severed the plane, hoping to find vulnerabilities that might be exploited. The Kalashtar, those humans bonded with rebel quarry who oppose the dreaming dark, also operate in Xendrik. They hunt for the same information that the inspired seek, hoping to find ways to strengthen the barrier between Dal Quor and Eberron. The Kalashtar and inspired wage a shadow war across Xendrik, fighting battles that go unnoticed by other explorers. The cults of the dragon below infest Xendrik, hidden but pervasive, slowly spreading corruption throughout the continent. These cultists worship the Daelkyr, those alien beings from Xulkur who invaded Eberron approximately 12,000 years ago and were eventually bound in Khyber by the gatekeeper's desperate magic. The Daelkyr represent madness given form, entities whose very nature contradicts reality. The cults believe that releasing the Daelkyr will bring about transformation, that the lords of Xulkur will remake Eberron. In Xendrik's deepest ruins, particularly those that descend far into Khyber, the cults establish temples where they perform ceremonies. They sacrifice victims to feed Daelkyr servants. They experiment on captives, attempting to replicate the transformations that the Daelkyr once performed. The gatekeepers work tirelessly against these cults, hunting cultists through the ruins, disrupting ceremonies, destroying artifacts connected to the Daelkyr. But Xendrik's size and the difficulty of travel mean that the gatekeepers can never be everywhere they are needed. The major ruined cities of Xendrik each hold their own terrible secrets. Melakat, lying amidst the jungles on the eastern edge of the Menechtaran Desert, once served as a center of giant civilization. Based on expedition reports, we can infer that the city contained facilities related to divination and observation, though much of its original purpose remains obscured by time and damage. Praxairk, located deep within the jungles along the Hydra River, served as a center for fire magic and elemental binding. The city rises from volcanic plains where lava flows create natural barriers. The Suletter Drow claim portions of Praxairk as their territory, warring with other factions that seek access to the city's forges. Explorers who venture into Praxairk face environmental dangers from volcanic activity and the Suletter themselves, who kill intruders without warning. The Drow view the city as sacred, as the source of their fire magic, as rightfully belonging to them by virtue of their ancestors having worked in its forges as slaves. The city contains workshops where giant masters created weapons and armor of legendary quality, tools and techniques preserved through magical stasis. Knowledge of elemental binding that surpasses anything modern artificers understand remains locked within the ruins, protected by both Suletter guards and ancient defenses. Beneath all the major ruins, beneath the surface cities and the Drow territories, and even the deepest aberration lairs, lie the seals that bind the Daelkyr. The gatekeepers placed these wards 12,000 years ago, anchoring them to the bones of Eberron itself, creating imprisonments designed to endure until the world ends. But time erodes everything, and the Daelkyr never stop testing their bonds. In certain caverns far below the surface, where reality grows thin and the barrier between Eberron and Xulkur weakens, you can sense the Daelkyr's presence. The air itself seems wrong, carrying scents that should not exist. The stone walls display patterns that move when you are not looking directly at them. Sounds echo from impossible directions. The Daelkyr want to return. They want to continue the work of transforming Eberron that the gatekeepers interrupted. They whisper to susceptible minds, promising power, promising transcendence, promising anything that might convince mortals to weaken the seals. Yet for all the dangers, for all the competing factions and ancient evils and fundamental threats to reality itself, Xendrik continues to draw explorers. The treasures remain real. The knowledge exists. The power waits to be claimed. Every expedition that enters the ruins represents another attempt to extract wealth or wisdom from the continent's jealously guarded secrets. The mysteries that remain unsolved outnumber those that have been explained. What exactly caused the devastation to affect Xendrik so severely? Was it primarily the moon breaker's activation, or the dragon's subsequent assault? Why does the traveler's curse persist 39,000 years after the events that created it? How many Titan constructs still wander Xendrik? And is there any way to safely deactivate them? The draconic prophecy itself presents the greatest mystery. What does it truly predict? Can its course be changed? Or does attempting to alter prophecy merely fulfill it through different means? Do the dragons who study it actually understand what they read? Or do they impose patterns on randomness because accepting that reality has no deeper meaning proves psychologically intolerable? These questions haunt scholars who study Xendrik from afar and explorers who risk their lives in the ruins. The answers might lie buried in some undiscovered vault, recorded in some crystal matrix waiting for activation, carved in some prophecy sequence that no one has successfully translated. Xendrik remains. The continent endures, patient and deadly, keeping its secrets, claiming its victims, occasionally surrendering treasures to those lucky or skilled enough to survive. It represents the ultimate challenge for adventurers, a place where skill matters, but luck matters more, where preparation helps, but cannot guarantee survival, where glory and wealth remain possible, but never probable. The jungle grows thicker each year, reclaiming more ruins, burying more history beneath vegetation. The Titan constructs continue their eternal patrols, walking paths that made sense to beings long dead. The drow burrow deeper, building their civilizations in the darkness. The prophecy waits, written in stone and crystal, and the substance of reality, predicting futures that may or may not come to pass. You can join this endless cycle. You can book passage to Stormreach, can hire guides and purchase equipment, can venture into the green hell seeking whatever you believe justifies the risk. You might return wealthy. You might return with knowledge that changes everything. You might discover your name becoming legendary. Or you might die, adding one more corpse to the millions already feeding Xendrik's soil. One more cautionary tale to the endless list of failures. The continent does not care which outcome you experience. It offers opportunity and threat in equal measure, leaving you to determine whether the potential rewards justify the certain dangers. The choice remains yours. Xendrik waits. The mysteries endure. The treasures remain buried in ruins that have stood longer than your nation has existed, protected by dangers that have killed thousands before you. But perhaps you will be different. Perhaps you possess the combination of skill and luck and determination that grants success where others found only death. The story continues. And somewhere in those ruins, in some chamber sealed since the devastation, in some vault that has never known a human footstep, lies whatever you seek, if you prove brave or foolish enough to claim it. If you enjoyed uncovering the mysteries of Xendrik with me today, please consider subscribing to Lore D&D and hitting that like button. Your support helps me continue exploring the deepest lore and most fascinating corners of dungeons and dragons and Eberron. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the Dark Continent. Until next time, may your expeditions be profitable and your escapes be narrow.